So this presentation definitely begins with an apology or a thank you to Richard. Richard, you stole almost all of my content and delivered it a lot better than I was going to deliver. So this presentation has undergone a last-minute revamp, for which I totally apologize that it will not look very good and may not flow. But I got the inspiration for kind of what I was going to do from mainly two things. One was, like we talked about earlier, when I started volunteering with Code Your Future, was just after you guys started to go remote. And I was definitely very intimidated by how to teach online, because all my experience previously was teaching a course at work in person, and we very much relied on the fact that everyone was sat around tables together, similarly to how I believe you probably used to operate, and one-to-one tutoring, which definitely always took place in person and is a very different environment. So what really worried me was how to understand whether or not only are the participants engaged, but also do they actually understand the content? Yeah, and so I wanted to kind of reflect upon what I've learned over the last couple of months and share some findings with everybody else. And the second reason, or the second inspiration behind this, was that I attended a course at work about how to teach online and thought there were some things that I definitely didn't know beforehand and that we could probably make use of as a bootcamp on how to use, and that's specific to Zoom and how to use like the full functionality of Zoom. So hopefully the Code Your Future license will include all of it, and that's why we're on Zoom today. Cool. So I'm split it into three sections. The first one is how can we ask questions virtually? The second one is how do we phrase questions? And the third one is just my random thoughts. So the first one is, can you hear me okay? And can you please react with the inbuilt reactions to tell me whether or not you can hear me? Nice. Okay, so we got about 5 people did a thumbs up, maybe another 4 nodded, and some more people didn't react. This is quite shocking. I agree, Richard. So I think what this demonstrates is, well, there are 2 things here. One of them is you can use a question like, can you hear me, in order to engage participants from the very beginning, especially if you expect them to react, and you can tell whether or not they're actually online. In case you have any students, particularly at the beginning of the course when they haven't given up or whatever, who are not actually there and are not really participating. And 2, it ensures you can actually hear me. And 3, what we learned from all of your reactions is not everybody knew how to react. So these are the reactions, and you should see them in the bottom of your screen. And it gives a good way that we can take different types of reactions. For instance, I could have asked for a thumbs up if you could hear me and a shocked face if I wasn't quite loud enough. And also, if you're the person teaching, so the person presenting, then what I would highly recommend is that you drag the box with everybody's pictures inside it so that you can see the whole class's face, or at least half of the class's faces, so that you can see the reactions on your screen as they come up. This is also a good one because although I can see everybody's pictures, if you're just looking at my screen on PowerPoint, particularly because most of the students only have one monitor, they won't be able to see each other's reactions, so they're less likely to be influenced by each other. Cool. So that's one method for getting responses out of students. Another one is, have you guys used the polling functionality before? If you have, then please respond with a yes. And if you have not, then do a no. Cool. So I'll just wait a little bit longer whilst we wait for some more to come in.
How would I do polling?
Well, Chris, you would do your polling if you click on the participants button. And then you'll get the image, just like I've screenshotted onto the screen. Can you see that now, Chris?
Yeah, perfect, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we can see here that 8 of you have never used polling, 3 people have used polling and 1 person wants me to go faster. But so we could use this as an example for the fact, I don't think you want me to speak any faster, that you can get a general reaction. Can you guys see the yeses and nos? Yeah, okay, cool. So that means that you can see each other's as well. This is quite a fast way without it really disrupting what's going on the screen of how you can get responses. And we could also use those go slower and go fasters to try and understand whether or not we're going at the right speed. But again, that might fall into getting a false positive that the 2 best students understand. Do you have a question, Dom?
No, sorry, I was just testing the button. Just while I have you, in my reactions, I have a clap and a thumbs up, but I don't have a thumbs down. Is that true?
No, it's really upsetting. Yeah, that's why I suggested a shocked face. There is no thumbs down.
Huh.
I don't
Although
see
if you click more next to the yes and no and go slower and go fasters, then you'll see you can also request a tea break. Yeah, we've got lots of people wanting a tea break. Yeah, so this is another way that we can get quick methods. So the next question is, what is your favorite way to do a poll in class? And the way I'd like you to answer this question is when you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, if you click on the annotate button, then you click on stamp, you should be able to get different types of stamps. And so if you choose a stamp and you put the stamp next to your favorite method. We have 1 person put one and then take it away again.
And notice you have to go to on the version I'm using, you have to go to the menu at the top to get annotated under view options.
Nice. Yeah. So this is generally a way that we could get different people to react to polls with lots of options and much more complicated options. So the way I did this is I obviously just prepared in advance a PowerPoint slide with the different options as bullet points. But if you wanted to do it during class, a bit like I was doing when I wasn't fully engaged in Richard's class, then you could make this on the go, and TA can make it whilst the lead speaker is speaking, etc., etc. And as you can see as they come up, we can see who is writing them. And I think, oh no, I've now gone forward. I think I can also see who did each one. I'm not sure. But also, if I wanted to have this information for later, I could choose to save it. And as the presenter, the save option is quite clear, even if it isn't to you guys right now. So moving on to the next slide. We'll see, here we go, that the first thing you need to do after you've used this functionality is that you need to clear the annotations. And here on the left-hand side, you can see the options I have. And so I'll click save and, oh no, sorry, not save. I'll click clear and then clear all drawings, but I could also choose just to clear yours or just to clear my own. And then you can also choose to save the whiteboard. So this could be helpful if you need to refer back to it later, and if you're doing something more complicated. For instance, if I decided to draw something more than just when I drew high when I was practicing. So if I were to give something like a flowchart that I drew on the fly, then I could save it to show to my future classes. So next, we also have the option which Richard made good use of earlier. And you can see here on the left-hand side our previous answers. And so we could ask questions to the chat. And then also when it came up in the questions after Richard's talk about how do we know which students are struggling the most, etc. If we were to have asked lots of questions to the chat during the course of the lesson, at the end of the lesson, we could save the chat. And that would mean that if a diligent teacher were to go back through the chat, they could see if there are any students who are repetitively struggling. And then you could much more subtly approach those students on their own instead of calling them out in front of the whole class. Or you could ban breakout rooms or lessons in that way in the future. Yeah, so that's just a handy bit of functionality. Obviously, Chris will know, and I definitely don't know what the rules are on downloading the chat, because obviously not everyone might be happy for you to have a copy of what they've been saying.
Ismay, can I just go back very quickly to the polling and the annotation in Zoom? I just say to any teachers who want to use those, give them a proper test out on lots of platforms, because at least until a couple of months ago, they weren't working reliably on Linux, and they have some one student, in fact, that you draw annotations and then their screen just goes black if they're the one that's sharing and they can't do anything about it. So,
oh, really? That is
yeah.
a very good point.
So just check, because obviously you've got students with all kinds of laptops and OSs. A good one for annotations is also Google Jamboard, and a good one for polling is Strawpoll. But obviously,
out of interest, Neil, did that happen just when the students themselves were drawing, or also when they're presenting?
When anyone drew on someone's machine that was sharing.
Okay, yeah.
But you can disable, if you're astute, you can disable and say don't allow anyone to draw on my screen.
Yeah, and you can also make it so that only you yourself can draw, if that was necessary. So something that I did before when students were sharing their screens in the breakout rooms is, instead of taking control or trying to describe where their buttons are, you can draw around the buttons to tell them where to click. Thanks for your help.
The main takeaway is just definitely test what you're doing. Don't assume it's going to all work for your 30 students when it works on your Mac and your pal's Mac.
Another thing we can do is, if you can you please raise your hand? Your virtual hand, sorry. Cool. So you'll do this by going into participants, and then you can click to raise your hand. And as the teacher, I can look through it either when I look at participants, although I didn't have it at the time when I screenshotted this call earlier, because no one unfortunately had their hand raised. You'll be able to see a hand next to their name, or when you look at the picture of everyone's face, you'll be able to see a hand in the side. And the way that we can use this is to see who's ready to answer our question. For instance, who can name a stop on the district line? Please raise your hand if you can. Richard, can you please answer?
Mansion House.
Nice one. So what I did there was I saw that Richard was ready. He'd raised his hand. He also looked engaged. I then clicked the button to ask him to unmute and invited him to speak. So we could have none of the confusion of, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't unmute properly. He was ready to answer straight away because he got a little prompt. And so if he wasn't paying attention, I wasn't going to be calling him out, and B, yeah, he was engaged. Cool. So that's another one we can make use of.
Can I just ask a quick question? Sorry to
yeah.
Flow. When someone raises a hand, as you are like a host or a co-host, does it make a notification to you, or have you just?
No, sadly not. So that's why I normally, if you can, depending on how your own personal setup is, set it up so that I can see everyone's faces, because then you can see the hand icon next to them.
Ah, okay.
I don't know how many teachers, out of interest, if everyone takes their hands down. Yeah. How many teachers have two screens? Ironically, not everyone's using virtual hands anymore. Okay, yeah, so it's only about a third. But yeah, because if you do, then that's what makes it easier. But obviously, if you don't, then that's a bit harder. But it also depends whether or not you're just sharing a window or you're sharing your whole screen. Because if you just share a window within it on Zoom, then you can put the participants next to it. And if you don't need to be able to see what's on the screen yourself, then you can drag the little icon that shows you someone's face. You can drag it so you can see all the faces over whatever you're sharing.
Yeah. Is it only the host that sees the hands up? Because I'm not seeing them.
You should also be able to see each other's hands up.
I can't even see mine.
So if you look at the participant list by clicking on participants.
Yeah, I can see them on there, but I thought you were saying you'd be able to see them on, my
see them both on the participants list. And then do you have a picture of my face when I speak?
I've got that you're the co-host, yeah, and yeah.
Oh no, not that one there. I mean of literally the video stream.
Yeah, I don't see the hands on the videos. It might just be that because you're the co-host, you can see it.
That's strange. I thought it was more people, but I'm not sure. At the moment, only Mark and Neil have their hands up.
Yes, but I can only see that because I'm looking at the participants list. I can't see it on my video.
Yeah. You can't see it in real.
Oh, I can see my hand.
Good to know.
That's weird.
So again, per client, I think, and OS.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm on Windows.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. So that means it's definitely something to bear in mind, because that means that the students won't be able to see them. The TAs might not. But obviously, if you're the one that chooses to use it, then you'll know if you can do it. Yeah. And if we want to use these things, of course, we do need to think about how we're going to guide the students through how to use them. For sure. Nice. Okay, so here we have another way of asking the question, which is, what is your favorite inbuilt function in JavaScript? And if your name is on the screen, sorry, I didn't have time to write down everybody's name, then can you please type the text of your favorite inbuilt function in your corresponding box? So you can type text using the annotation tools. That's very interesting, Leroy, that you put it with the brackets, which is what I would have naturally done, and not everybody did for their own functions. So the advantage of doing things in this way, and I do apologize for the people who I didn't get around to putting their names on the board. Yes, Neil, I know it's very sad. I would only do this with a small group, but it's something you could consider in a breakout room or in an evening session. And it means that otherwise, if I were to invite you all to put text on the screen, chances are somebody would write over the top of each other. And this is because you can't see the text on the screen as someone else until the person has clicked out of typing it. But whereas when I have presented each of you with a box in order to write your reply in, then you automatically write it in the appropriate space.
I was just thinking, sorry.
Yeah, Alistair?
It just occurred to me another way potentially you could do this is to give people a link to something like a Google Doc and then have that on your screen because it shows edits.
That is a very good point. You definitely could do. You could also, I really like Miro and using Miro boards, because then participants can kind of walk around the Miro board with you. But they can also refer back to things themselves as opposed to PowerPoint slides. Does that mean you've never heard of Miro, Dom?
No, sorry, I just didn't know that pi was a built-in function. Pi is a value, no?
No, I can see it isn't, but never mind.
This wasn't supposed to be a technical test. I do apologize. I wasn't positive whether or not we only had technical people.
You're not meant to put me down, you're meant to build me up.
Dom, I think you need to reconsider this before fundamentals. Whereas Chris has been giving positive reactions. You can't just get away with putting hearts everywhere. Okay, right. So then when you have particularly disruptive students, you can just clear their drawings. Okay, I could probably remove controls, but we'll probably want you to be able to draw all over again. But of course, just as a heads up, if anyone were planning on doing that, it can be embarrassing if you're a student who hasn't turned up and your name is on the board. That might be an issue. And you obviously have to have prepared in advance in order to have all the names in the table. So the next section will be how do we phrase the questions themselves. Does anyone have any questions about what I've talked about so far? Is that a question, Paddy? Or do you just like the stamps?
You're muted, Paddy.
Maybe Paddy cannot speak. Okay, we're going to assume.
Oh, he's lost the unmute button, he says.
You're all right, Paddy.
We hear you, Paddy.
I just couldn't find the unmute button because something was open, but now I'm muted, so there we go.
Perfect. Did you have a question or are you okay?
I didn't have a question. I just got asked if I did, and I definitely don't.
Oh, cool. It was because you put a question mark on the screen, I believe.
Oh, sorry, misclick.
That's okay, no worries. Okay, cool. So there are obviously problems with the stamps in the fact that people might accidentally start stamping away. But yeah, so on to the next section, which is definitely not something I had previously intended to present today. So I do apologize if it's a little bit rusty. But it's about how do we phrase questions and the different types of questions that we can use. So already we've talked about when we present the question, how do we do it on Zoom? So how do we embrace the fact that we are now online? We cannot see people's reactions. But this section is something that you could probably equate back to the real classroom in the end. And it's about how we phrase the questions which we're asking the students. So we have 5 different types of questions to start with, and we can remember them using the CHOMP word, and the C stands for close-ended questions. So these are questions which produce definitive questions such as yes, no, or a number like 3, and they're useful for summing things up and getting an agreement. For example, would you like to begin your practice session? Or something along those lines. We also have H, which is hypothetical questions. This asks a participant to describe how they would think they would handle a particular situation. For example, Dom, if you had not heard of the question before, how would you approach understanding it better?
Sorry, I was distracted. I was stuck on the heart emoji and I was trying to get rid of it. I wasn't paying attention.
It's okay. You look like you're a concentrating person. Nick,
I'm sorted now though.
don't worry. Nick, if you had not heard of a function that someone suggested earlier before, how would you go about understanding it better? Google, perfect. Yep, that's exactly what I thought the answer was going to be. So a hypothetical question is when we present a scenario to somebody that they haven't yet encountered necessarily. So for example, I'm going to assume that Nick probably knew what parse into, map and filter were, but we have now given him the idea of he can prepare in advance for what he would do when someone puts up a very bizarre type of function. The O in CHOMP is for open-ended questions. These are broad information gathering questions with more elaborate responses rather than just yes or no. For example, they will often begin with the what, how, why. So an example of this could be, Mark, why did you join this call this evening? Mark, you're muted.
I realise that. Why did I come? To enhance my abilities for teaching if I ever brave enough to do it.
Nice. And then if this were to be a, if we have more time, etc., then I could go into this further with Mark. So I could ask him why he's currently not brave enough and if he's ever taught before. For example, and if he will ever join one of these teaching calls ever again, etc., etc. So it's a good way of broadening out the conversation. It may lead to you going slightly off track. That's definitely a con of this method, but it does have its place. And then we have mirror questions. These are where you use the speaker's words to clarify the meaning of what he or she said, which can be helpful in confirming their commitment to a position. So an example would be, why should I use the speaker's words to verify meaning? Now, I don't know if you saw what I did just there, but I did a mirror question itself. I said something and then I phrased it back as a question. And this can be particularly useful if you have 2 lead teachers in a room together. They can mirror each other to build off each other and give the students that little bit of extra time to think about and absorb the knowledge. Now, the P is for probing questions. And this is if you pick up on a topic or point that's already been raised to move the conversation forward. These questions will add depth and they can also encourage reflection in the students. So, for example, here on the screen, we have 5 question types. But what other question types do you know? Feel free to unmute and shout them out if you do know any.
Leading.
Nice. Yes. And can you describe what a leading question would be, Owen?
One which, well, I was going to say goads, but I think that's a wrong phrase, but it's sort of like
Guides?
yeah, guides is better. Yeah, guides them along. So yeah, just sort of like prodding them a little more. So can you give me any more or something like that? Encouraging them to think a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Nice one. That was a really good example. Thanks, Owen. Yeah.
Really easy warm-up softball questions that everyone could get an answer to and get the
exactly.
Get the ball rolling.
So you could use them at the beginning of a lesson when you're just trying to engage them and warm them up, or if you had a particularly shy student on a one-to-one call, then you could use them there in order to open up the conversation and kind of get it flowing. Cool. So those are our general types of questions. And then we have different questioning methods as well. So these ones would include overhead questions. So that would be if I were to ask a question to the whole group. And an example of that would be raise your hand for who here works as a software developer. Nice. We have lots of people that either don't or don't want to admit it. I'm not sure which one's worse. And then we could have direct questions. This would be if I was asking an individual or a team or a breakout room a specific question. But when doing this, it's polite to use the person's name. So the example that I came up with earlier was, Chris, what did your breakout room decide was the best way to ask questions? We obviously haven't actually had any breakout rooms, so Chris, you don't need to answer my question, don't worry. But it was just an example of something that could actually come up in class. And then we also have redirecting questions. This would be if I asked the group a question that's an individual within the group had posed themselves. So the point of doing this is that it can encourage group participation when you'd rather have other participants answer the question instead of doing it yourself. So you could use this if you don't know the answer to a question, but you could also use it if the question's a little bit controversial and you don't want to be defensive or combative. So for instance, I could be like, thanks for your question, Richard. What did everyone else think about Richard's question? Obviously, Richard hasn't actually asked a question, but if he had, then this would invite everybody else to give some feedback on what they thought the answer could be to his question. And then we also have sequencing, and this would be asking a series of related questions to increase participation. So at the beginning of a session, I might ask, who here finished the assignment? And then when someone admits to having finished the assignment, I could say, and so what was your answer to question 4? And then when they told me what their answer to question 4 was, I could ask them about why they chose that answer, or what else they considered along the way. And this is kind of a way of helping it all kind of build off of each other and to have a better idea of what future questions to ask as you go along. So an example here for you of a sequencing is, can you please respond to the poll on the screen about what your favorite language is? You can use the stamps to do so. Nice. I appreciate that we have some variety. I was a bit worried that everyone was going to be a JavaScript fan, but I'm quite happy. Oh no, we did have some C++ and Python. Yeah, you can scribble if you prefer. Nice. And then, is your favorite language missing from this list? If it is, then can you respond with a green check? And if not, then can you put a red cross? That's using the same tools we used earlier that you can find under the participants list. Nice. So I can now see who has answered what, and for 5 people, their favorite languages are in the list, and 2 people, their favorite language is not in the list. So, Sergio, I hope I haven't just butchered your name. What is your favorite language?
My favorite language is PHP.
Nice. Okay, yeah. So that's an example of where, first of all, I gathered the ideas on what people thought their favorite languages were. I then asked a more specific question and then followed up depending on the responses I got. Very funny to the person who likes English. Maybe I should have added programming to that. Entirely my own fault. Also, as a heads up, when you have asked people to use the green and red crosses, there's also the option next to where you do them, if you're the co-host, in order to clear all of the responses so that you can ask a follow-up question immediately. Nice. I'm now going to clear all of your drawings and we can move on. So what other random musings did I have when I was thinking, first of all, about how to do this session, and secondly, about how to recover from the fact that Richard presented my session as his own in advance. And so the ones I had were that it might be especially important for us to use more than one medium to ask questions. So this would be to show the question in writing and on the screen, particularly as we have so many students for whom English is a second language. Yeah, it was just something I thought about. I haven't been involved from the beginning of a class yet, so I don't really know, but I would assume that students might struggle more at the beginning than at the end of the course as well. So it's definitely something that I was thinking about what to deal with as I was thinking about the fundamentals course. And also, when I was thinking about things, I was like, what do we do about challenging participants? And I thought this was somewhere very appropriate for questions as well. So for example, if Dom had been being quite quiet today, I could ask him on the fact we hadn't heard from him yet, and I could specifically ask him about his thoughts. And then I also wrote down about two screen wonders, and that was just if you have access to a second screen, that is definitely something that recently I found to be quite useful. And if anyone wants help later on how to properly use two screens with PowerPoint so that you can get the speaker notes, etc., or all the other Zoom things on the other screen, I can try and talk you through it. So yeah. Oh, and then my other random musing was, I know I've been in lots of calls where people have struggled to share videos with sound. And if anyone has had this problem before or comes across this in the future, then the way to do it is you'll see here in the red box at the bottom left-hand side, when you choose to share a screen, you can click to share the computer sound and to optimize the screen share for video clips. And this came up most recently when someone wanted to run a music quiz, but I could also imagine it coming up in our classes, as I know we're going to be doing Khan Academy videos, or even if you wanted to show something off YouTube, etc. Note that as default, it already mutes your own laptop's notifications, so we won't be getting them coming through. Yeah. And as a final example, can you please write on the screen what are your key takeaways from this session?
Very good.
Pi is not a function. Oh dear. It is definitely cool to be able to write it as text itself instead of with a cursor. I was kind of hoping that some of you were going to write over each other just to demonstrate why I bothered to make a table, but maybe not. Nice. Thank you. And if you have any advice on how to do this sort of thing better, please let me know. Do we have any questions to end?
That was excellent, Esme.
Thank you very much. Back over to you, Chris.